Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk ABM with me, Declan, CMO of account-based marketing agency Strategic ABM. ABM is one of the hottest B2B strategies right now, helping companies to win, grow and retain their most important accounts. This podcast allows me to spend some time talking to account-based marketing leaders about their ABM programs and share their insights with other B2B marketers, wherever you are on your ABM journey. Okay, well, today I'm joined by Daniel Dong, who's the Manager of Expansion Growth at Samsara. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Declan. Excited to chat.
Okay, well, we're going to talk next half an hour or so about ABM and learn a bit more about your ABM journey. But I think I'll tell a bit of a story, actually. I came across Daniel. There was some news release about some awards not too long ago, actually. And I saw that you were awarded the ABM Nerd Award, which kind of jumped out at me a lot. And I started digging around, started looking on your profile, started learning a bit about you, contacted you to say, hey, would you like to be a guest on Let's Talk ABM? So first of all, congratulations on that award, which I think was from the ABM Leadership Alliance. The award, I think, was all to do with a heavy emphasis on those B2B marketers and those ABMers that have a heavy emphasis on data in their campaigns. So let's talk about data, if we can, just for a second. We'll start off with a big topic, and then we'll be a bit more kind of wide as we go on. But let's talk about data for a second. I mean, data, is a huge part of any ABM program. Do you think that investment is valued, or do you think people actually undervalue the importance of data in ABM?
I think that's a question. That's a very interesting question. I think maybe a better question to ask would be, how do you know the investment is the right kind of investment, right? For the organization, because every company is at a different stage. And so if you are a earlier startups looking for product market fit, maybe you don't need to invest too heavily in, say, intent data because, like the category isn't there yet. If you are looking to expand into new customers, maybe the right move is to invest in some third-party data as in addition to kind of have a robust like first-party like lead gen, website tracking, all those kind of things. And if you're kind of saturated your existing your new customers, maybe it's about collecting data from your customers and build new insights for kind of upsell, cross-sell. So the investment really depends on the stage of your company. But what I do think that everyone can kind of benefit from, and I've kind of learned this along my journey as well, is to think about the end picture of like, if everything is perfect and you could have everything you want for the customer's entire life cycle, entire journey, what would that data roadmap look like? What kind of data would you need? And then build a kind of like an architecture around it that can eventually support all of those things, because there's a lot of data and you can't get all of them, all in one place in one day. So, you kind of put it on a map and then fill it in as your organization is mature enough to get to those points, would be kind of how I would approach it if I were to approach it again today.
Well, so I think we'll dig a bit more into that a little bit later, actually, Dan, and we'll talk a little bit more about data. But let's just talk about your ABM program there. My understanding when we were chatting earlier was that I think you started your ABM program about a year and a half or so ago. And it was obviously, I think the idea was to support your move from the kind of SMB space into the enterprise space. So what have you learned in that move from, winning smaller clients to try to win larger clients? What's been your learning there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when you think about SMB versus enterprise, SMB is about volume. So a lot of, I think that the framework to approach problems, funnel optimization, conversion rate optimization, sourcing kind of new top of funnel impression, those are more similar to, I would say, a B2C than enterprise, right? And so there's kind of a shift in mindset when we move when at least our team started to support more of the enterprise initiatives at the company. Enterprise, I think, is more about the strategy of defining the set of accounts that you want to pursue and get as much data points, get as deep as you can into those accounts, collect as many data as possible, and then eventually think about like almost like a regression model. Think about what data points are truly important in moving the lever. And sometimes, like it kind of depends on qualitative feedback. I
Mm,
have a more of a quantitative background, so I like to think everything in data, but there is a qualitative kind of component to it, and you just need a lot more time to collect those data. And so, as you kind of progress, it's also good to think about what are some leading indicators that you can capture in your project. If the sales cycles are, I don't know, 6 months, a year, or longer, and in some cases for larger companies. And so think about what leading indicators you can capture to give more immediate feedback on the things that you're doing. Could be helpful as well. And then so that's something I learned, like about how you would approach it differently, for between SMB and enterprise. You know.
yeah, I think it's a really interesting point there around because obviously the word data has been mentioned several times in this interview already, and I suspect it's going to be mentioned several times towards as we go through this interview. And interestingly, obviously, the leading indicators sometimes aren't necessarily data sources in the traditional sense, in terms of measuring the relationships that you're building in those accounts at an enterprise level, or measuring or trying to measure the reputation that you're building in that account, right? And those two indicators will lead through to revenue, but sometimes you need to have a little bit of a kind of a more of a qualitative approach to the data as opposed to, as you said, a quantitative approach, right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mixture of both. Right, you can't just rely on qualitative feedback,
Mm.
because data does tell some sort of truth that humans are not able to capture, and so uh, deciding what is the balance between the two,
Mm.
I think that's the tricky part, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So when we spoke earlier, Dan, you talked about, and it's kind of struck a chord with me, you talked about your ABM thinking and you broke it down into four categories: strategy, data, tools, and tactics. And once again, data is appearing there again, right? Strategy, data, tools, and tactics. Could you expand on each one of those a little bit more for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about strategy, I think about, what is the kind of total addressable market,
Mm,
that you have with the products or services that you're offering, and how do you think about what accounts within that portfolio to break into? How do you prioritize accounts either based on qualitative feedback from people from sales, or think about kind of if you already have some data, what are the kind of segments that have already gained traction that still have a lot of potential. That's kind of what I would think about, right? Because you have a lot of accounts in your CRM. Hopefully, I presume. How do you prioritize them? How do you go after the one that's the biggest bang for your buck? And so having that alignment at the beginning across all of the go-to-market teams,
mm,
I think that's a very important thing, right? Like aligning on that strategy, and then from there, that's when you ask the question around a data, right? Like, do we have the right data in place? Like I mentioned earlier, if you're after looking at your strategy, you're going mostly after new customers, then you would need a different set of data than, say, if you're going after expanding on your existing
mm,
customers. And so within those, there'll be different kinds of like data that I'm sure everyone is plastered with, all these kind of data vendors and like different kinds of articles, and you just have to categorize what kind of category does this data belong to, and really think about their importance and what kind of value they could add both immediately, and down the long term. And so I think that's kind of the data piece. that is everybody's heard a lot about first party data, third party data,
Yeah.
all those sorts of kind of things that people are probably pretty well versed at today. And then thinking from there, once you have the accounts that you want to kind of tackle, you have the right data to figure out how to prioritize, what kind of messaging are you tailoring. I think it's important to think about the tools, right? Because for ABM, you're not just a marketer talking directly to your audience. You want to be able to connect that experience for your prospects and your customers. So it involves kind of cross functional collaboration. So sometimes when you think something works, like you need to make sure that other teams also have the tools that they need in order to kind of carry on the same messaging and same experience, right? And so that really depends on the
Mm.
organization. On the growth team at Samsara, we're very lucky that we have a lot of people who can be technical and can build MVPs for things. So we iterate really fast and build tools for maybe that's the SDR team, maybe that's a sales team to kind of get stuff rolling more quickly. And so that can help really drive alignment. And then finally, thinking about tactics, I think this is kind of where marketers are kind of, are really paid to do. Thinking about what creative messaging can you kind of get people's attention, what channels and ways
Mm.
can you kind of, ignite that kind of conversation, whether that's through, more deeply insightful content, whether that's through kind of a nice nudge like a direct mail or like a in-person events with some sort of like twist. I think there's a lot of tactics that you can kind of try, but that's where marketers can be a lot more creative.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I think about those four areas.
Well, I think it's very useful actually that people think about those buckets in a funny kind of way, that they think about those four areas where they have to, depending, as you said, on their maturity, where they should lean heavier on or where they can actually invest more on, depending on which stage they are on their ABM journey, right? And it's interesting you mentioned about the intent there. And I think it made me think about a conversation I was having with Danny Nail, who's head of the ABM Center of Excellence at Salesforce. And he was talking about the difference between intent and interest. And he was basically saying that a lot of people lean on intent when actually it's not intent, it's just interest. And I think going back to your point around data, trying to pull together those data points to say, well, actually, is this account showing intent or is it just showing interest, which is a completely different thing to intent, right? So I think if anybody hasn't heard that or listened to that interview with Danny Nail, it's definitely worth listening to, because it kind of there's a lot of parallels with what you're saying as well here. So we mentioned earlier 1.5 years of your ABM program, moving particularly from an SMB into an enterprise focus. What's the learning that you've taken from it in terms of, do you know what, if I had my time again, I would do that differently? What would you do differently if you had your time again?
That's uh, that's an interesting question. Um, I think one thing to kind of note here is one of my biggest takeaway is like and I kind of alluded to this a little bit
Mm,
earlier, is that
mm,
data is not perfect, right? There are things outside of data that whether it's something that can be captured but are not being captured right now, or just some things that really can't be captured in kind of enterprise marketing and selling, that you just need to appreciate that and really leverage it. But then the other pieces around kind of like, even though it's not perfect, doesn't mean that it cannot be better. And like, how much time would you want to invest in that? What does that end picture look like? Having that vision, I think, a lot of times we build airplanes as we fly them, but
mm.
it would be good to think about, eventually, where are you going to land, and having that kind of vision around, if I can have everything I want, where would it be? And start kind of piecing that together. I think that's something that I would have wanted to have, if I were to do it again.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is surrounding kind of experimentation and being patient with the data and the results. I think coming from SMB, the conversions can happen really fast. In the enterprise, less so. And so, how do you have conviction around some of the experiments that you want to run, and be patient with seeing it come to fruition? It takes a little bit longer. And that's something that I wish I could tell myself earlier when I started this journey, is to you know um, have a little bit more conviction about your intuition, stick to it, but be very thoughtful about what kind of results that you need to see.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point actually, because I think as you were saying, Dan, the when you're after an enterprise account, I mean ABM, if you had to define it, you'd say, it's for targeting enterprise or mid-market enterprise. It's for targeting companies that have got a long sales cycle, that have got a complex sale, that have got a high consideration solution. So all those things point to time. And obviously, in the world that we live in, not everyone has time or everyone gives you time. So I think a lot of other guests on Let's Talk ABM have said that one of the key things is to make sure people are aware at the beginning of this journey what the time frame looks like, what good looks like, and for them to make sure that they're not, unnecessarily kind of trying to speed you up or demand results that you clearly can't deliver in that time frame. And as you mentioned, in the SMB space, things move quickly. People make decisions. The purchase price, the level of consideration is a lot lower. They can put it on a corporate credit card or whatever, and then off they go. But if you're selling something into enterprise, there are certain steps that they have to go through. People need to be considered, buying committees, all of the above, right? That we all know and love or not love, as the case may be, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think, and then that's why I think leading indicators are important, right? Like you also want to set the right kind of North Star metrics at the beginning and really figure out what problem you're trying to solve. Are you solving a pipeline problem? Are you solving a revenue problem? Clearly define that and build expectations around those with your team. Maybe you don't have a year or 2 years to see if the ABM has a program has a positive ROI. So what other metrics can you use earlier in the funnel to give you that indication that you're successful or you're not in the right direction? I think that would be important.
Yeah, and I think knowing when, I think also not having everything set in stone. So being flexible enough to say, do you know what? We thought this was going to work. It looks like it's not going to work. So we're going to change. And I think not being afraid to change, I think is a good thing from an ABM point of view, because you can't necessarily give it the 9, 12, 15, 18 months, because you'll know from your initial work whether or not the message is resonating, whether your account experience, your creatives, your value proposition, whether that's actually resonating with the market, and then you can obviously make decisions, right? So,
Yeah.
well, another thing that you said to me previously when we were having a chat before this recording was that you said something to me along the lines of, we test and look at the data, and then we decide to scale. And then you follow a first principle problem solving approach. So, I mean, that made me just think a lot actually about the approach you take there at Samsara. So, talk me through that. What does that look like in reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Max, the head honcho for the Samsara growth team, and the first kind of growth marketer for Samsara, he's kind of a champion for this first principle problem solving approach, where when you have a broad problem, you should break it down into different components, into different buckets, right? Kind of like earlier when we were breaking it down, the ABM program by strategy, tools, and tactics. Think about kind of the different buckets of problems and what levers that you could potentially use to solve each of those buckets, right? I think it's important to have kind of a analytical mindset, because the problem is very complex. There are a lot of components to it. There are a lot of things that you can prioritize. You will never have enough time to prioritize all of them. So how do you kind of break down the problem? Think about the levers that you can pull, and the levers that have the biggest impact and the lowest effort at any given time,
Mm.
and how do you sequence them? I think that's kind of how we think about a lot of the problems that we solve, whether that's in the SMB space, in the enterprise, or kind of anything else. And so once you kind of have that, like you have an understanding of the different areas where you can make an impact, then you start kind of testing out different hypotheses of what levers can you truly pull in order to solve kind of those issues, right? Is it a paid advertising? Is it a sales experience kind of optimization? Is it different kinds of like door openers? Is it peer to peer kind of programs to kind of get people involved? Like, right? Like, are you trying to create pipeline? Are you trying to
Mm.
accelerate pipeline? Or trying to improve close rate? Or are you trying to upsell and cross sell? Right? Think about all the like what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then from there test out different things to kind of always have a mindset of like, if you were trying to present what you've done to somebody else, talk about kind of what is the incremental value of the lever that you're pulling, right? So always have a mindset to have an A/B test going, to have ways to kind of measure the impact that you have. And you can do this with account-based marketing too, right? Like you just
Mm.
chop the addressable accounts into two separate buckets, and one you run with the sequence that you're designing, and then the other is control, and see how it kind of plays out over the longer term. So we do a lot of these tests to figure out what is the incremental value of these kind of different tactics that we have. And once we have that, we can extrapolate that to the larger universe, and then decide if that's something that you want to focus on scaling right now,
Yeah.
right? Because with any kind of programs in ABM, there's a lot of enablement components going on. There's a lot of automation components that can go into it. That takes a lot of effort, but you don't want to be doing that stuff before you can realize if there's true value in the thing that you're doing, or if there's enough value for you to focus on right
Yeah.
now. And so actually, there's this book called Traction. It was written like 2014, I think, by a guy named Gabriel Weinberg, who's like a serial entrepreneur. And he talk about how like startups kind of test different channels when they're going, and then they go deep into one channel to figure out if there's kind of actually traction in there, and if there is, then they kind of scale it. I think it's kind of the same principle that we use. Although that book may have been more for uh, B2C, I would think, but the principle is the
The
same.
principle is the
Um,
same. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I love that. I love that idea, and I think there are a lot of learnings there actually for anybody looking to launch an ABM program and thinking about that kind of, as you said, a lot of the testing, a lot of the A/B testing, testing messaging, as you said, testing control
Mhm.
groups A versus B. There's an awful lot of good thinking in there, Dan. You mentioned there your growth team and your colleagues. Um,
Mhm.
you mentioned previously that it was a real kind of interdisciplinary team in terms of the makeup of that team, and that there was some. What do you think it takes to make a great growth team?
Yeah, I think there are a couple components. I can offer my opinion,
Mm.
but I'm sure there are a lot of people who would be better at speaking about this more intelligently. But I think there are a couple of things. So one thing is, what is kind of the North Star metrics that you are trying to improve and pursue, right? Like going back to the first principle, what is the problem that you're trying to solve is the first thing. And then the second thing is, do you have the capability to iterate really quickly, right? Do you have the mandate and the liberty and the skill sets to do all of that? And so, you know, uh, at the Samsara growth team, we're very lucky that we have our own kind of growth engineering team. as well. So
Mm.
when we need to do more complicated stuff, that team is super helpful in like helping us to get everything kind of running. In addition to scaling a lot of like really critical projects for the company as a whole. And our marketers are also, I would say, pretty well versed in all sorts of different things, right? Like you don't need to hire necessarily a data science person in order to do a first iteration of a, say, like an intent model,
Yeah.
for example, right? Like there are things that people can kind of do the basics and have an MVP, and I think that encouraging that kind of creativity, having the latitude to do things, that's very important to get those experiments set up really quickly, and then when you measure those results, having people who have analytical mindsets really helps with proving those kind of business value to larger stakeholders, and then get them to kind of be on board with you scaling them.
Yeah. I think I'd agree. There's an awful lot of data, as you said, a lot of analytics involved in ABM, and there's also, I think, if you'd agree, a requirement for a lot of commercial acumen, and a
Mm.
requirement for people to to maybe actually come from outside of the classic marketing background and come even from an SDR commercial background to have experienced the sales, because you need to obviously work really closely with sales, and having that credibility is really important. I don't know, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say having people from diverse backgrounds help you not kind of be entrenched in
Mm,
the way that you kind of always solve the problem, right? Not what is the saying? Like, not everything is a nail to your hammer,
mm,
or I don't know if I say that right, but yeah, I think having people with diverse backgrounds help look at problems differently. Maybe there are things in kind of their previous experience or industries or skill set that can help solve the problem in a new way,
mm, mm.
that you can't necessarily be done if you just put all of kind of the traditional people in the same room.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're at the beginning of, well, we're in February now, coming to March 2022. It sounds a bit weird to say that, but it's 2022. Um, what does the rest of the year look like for you there and the team? What can we expect from you this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there are a lot of very exciting things going on with kind of the ABM programs. I think we have better alignment than before. We have better infrastructure than before. We have more confidence with kind of a lot of the experiments that we've run. So we know what directions that we
Mm,
can kind of focus on and keep on scaling. So I think there's a lot of like pretty exciting projects, ideas, orchestrations on the roadmap. There's also kind of more kind of different data sets that we can use than before to kind of leverage that like holistic picture um, uh, of things to come. So yeah, lots of really exciting things I think on our roadmap.
well, I'll definitely obviously be looking out for you and your posts on LinkedIn to talk about that as you share them, no doubt, throughout the year. So just a few more questions just to finish off, Dan. So
Uh-huh.
demand gen and ABM, there's an awful lot of talk about both uh, strategies, whether one is a subset of the other, or whether they are standalone strategies. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I think different companies name their teams kind
Mm,
of differently, and they could have the same name and do completely different things.
mm,
But I think the principle is the same. If you just focus on creating kind of touch points, if you just focus on specific improving the engagement of this specific touch point, then it's harder to kind of see the holistic picture, right? Because you can do a lot of different touch points, but like, who are you really targeting? What are you really trying to educate them on? What are you really trying to get them to do, right? So whether that's like a ABM team or a demand gen team, I would hope that they kind of start from that question before diving into the specific kind of tactics. to run, right? Because there's no shortage of creative ideas, email headlines or campaigns that you can run. But where are you really moving the needle? Where are you really making an impact as a team? What metrics are you trying to improve? Those would be the question that's more helpful. And then as a team, you have those skill sets to kind of leverage the marketing experience that you have to improve them.
Yeah, great answer, Dan. So, what do you think is the hardest part of ABM?
The hardest part of ABM, I would say, we build the airplane as we fly them, and it's pretty interesting problem to solve. I don't really necessarily know if there's one area that's that's harder than the other. But I would say the critical things to kind of get right is alignment with other go-to-market teams that's beyond marketing. Surprisingly, that's the way to do account-based marketing, right? And then the other piece is kind of around making sure that people buy into the value of data, not just in the short term, but also in the long term, right? How do you convince people to be okay with a 3-year roadmap of data when you're just there starting out? So you should be able to strategize on those things, prove incremental values, get trust, get buy-in, also validate kind of your own hypothesis of whether something is right, but always have that kind of end goal picture in mind, and then reverse engineer what steps that you need to take right now based on kind of the maturity of your team and the maturity of your business.
Great answer, Dan. Last question to ask you. The way I kind of frame this is that you're about to kind of shut down your laptop. It's a Friday evening. You've had a tough week, and you're looking forward to enjoying the weekend. And suddenly, up pops a message, phone call from a friend who's working for another B2B tech company, and they say, Dan, I've been asked to create an ABM program. I need some advice. And it's Friday evening, so what? And they say, what advice can you give me? I've got a meeting on Monday morning. What's that one piece of advice you would give them?
Well, there probably would be a couple of qualifying questions, what is this meeting for, right? What are you trying to get out of the meeting? Are you trying to get buy-in? Are you trying to get approval? Are you trying to get budget? What precisely are you trying to get out of this meeting? And then the kind of advice would kind of be different. But one thing I would say is, account-based marketing is kind of, I feel like the framework or approach that you should think about enterprise marketing. So if your business is trying to get into this space, it would be good to have some sort of program around it, but everybody is kind of different. So, you'll need kind of time and space to figure out what that means to what the ABM program at the specific company that you're working for means to them, right? Different stages of the funnel could be totally different. And so think about that piece. What is the most important thing at the moment for the business that a ABM program can help address?
I think that's a great answer. So to summarize, what are you trying to solve with ABM? And then try to document that, and obviously get agreement on that, and then you can actually start to build out an ABM program and an ABM strategy, right?
Yeah, that's a great rephrase. I'll tell my friend to call you.
Well, no, I'm just summarizing what you said. It's your knowledge and my
much shorter and succinct.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for sharing your ABM journey today, and we wish you every success there at Samsara, and look forward to learning what you're going to do this year.
Thank you, Declan. It's a real pleasure talking to you, and hope to chat with you soon.
Good. Thanks, Dan. If you enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk ABM, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Feel free to rate and review this podcast. Thanks so much for listening.